You do it. Make your dreams come true. Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
You know, I want to. Speaking of this, I actually do want to pivot a little bit to a slightly different area that you've written about, that we've both thought about. And what I want to do is I want to tell you a study that I just read that blew my mind, and then I want you to react to it. Okay?
Uh-oh.
I read a study. I read about 15 social psych and behavioral science studies every morning, which is not normal. But I read a study about empathy. About empathy and leadership and empathy. And it was looking at the most effective leaders with respect to how they manage their workforces and the bottom line of their companies, but not just the public valuation of these companies, really a robust understanding of effective leaders. And what it found was the most effective leaders over the course of their leadership career, the cadence of their leadership career. There's some really interesting stuff. For example, they tend to be the most effective between the ages of 55 and 70. That's the zone of effective leadership. Particularly for business leaders, because high energy, high wisdom haven't said screw it yet. Okay, that's one of the interesting findings from this. But here's what I'm getting at. The study also found that as they went through the cadence of their careers and got more and more and more effective, their empathy went down. They had lower empathy at the end of their careers than at the beginning, and it was monotonically decreasing over the course of their careers. What does Simon Sinek say?
What's monotonically mean?
That means continuously.
Oh, okay.
It's like, I got that from Shakespeare.
I'm surprised by that, to be honest. The whole idea that they're better at the end makes more sense because you know, if you want candid advice, you ask an old person because they don't care what you think about them. And happiness studies show that as well. People are at their happiest when they're young because they're oblivious. And they're happiest when they're old.
He didn't say clueless. He said oblivious.
And they're happiest when they're old because they've faced their own mortality and they're at peace. And like they don't care what you think about them anymore. And people actually at their least happiest in middle age, where you're most concerned what everybody thinks about you and if you're successful and if you're good looking and if you're doing well and all of that stuff. And so the idea that empathy would actually go down later, the only thing that I could react to then is, have they just become jaded? I'm surprised by it, to be honest. And maybe it goes to that thing that they don't care what you think about them anymore. I don't.
So let me give you a second piece of the puzzle now, because now I think that and this is what opened my eyes to it.
I want to know more details about who they were.
You're right. I mean, that of course.
There's a missing detail there.
For sure, among others. They got less empathetic, but they got more compassionate. That's the interesting part. Empathy and compassion are not the same thing. Linking to somebody emotionally is not the same thing as being dedicated to doing the right thing for people even when it's hard.
I think that I agree with, because they don't have to be all wrapped up in the emotion of the people that they're serving, but they have a deep-seated belief that the right thing to do is to take care of the people because it's the right thing to do. So perhaps being empathetically disconnected actually makes it easier to be compassionate because it becomes intellectualized, as opposed to, because we can make stupid decisions based on empathy because there's too much feeling. Where you can actually say the right thing. I think it's the moral compass. I think it sounds like the moral compass grows, even though I'm not personally invested emotionally in the decisions of what's happening. I just know it's the right thing to do.
It seems to me that this is a key point that you make in Leaders Eat Last, isn't it? It's
I like that.
Leaders, particularly military leaders that you talk about, are not empathetic with their charges, but they're highly compassionate with their charges in the robust sense of this, right?
I think that's very interesting.
So I asked. I was thinking about an example of this principle that I could really use. And I have this strange friendship and an ongoing working relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which is the most unexpected thing, because he hangs out at this think tank, the American Enterprise Institute.
He knows where you work, right?
He knows where I work. He does know where I work, which is the weirdest thing of all, right? I mean, you'd think that, and what you notice when you're dealing a lot closely with the Dalai Lama, that there's not a strong sense of him linking to you with your personal experiences. On the contrary, you say goodbye and it's remorseless. And you say hello and it's like he just saw you or maybe never saw you before. But he's highly compassionate, really compassionate person. And it seemed to me, and one time when I was leaving him after I'd been with him for several days, and he said to me, he said, I see you and I always want to give you something, but I don't own anything. And he said, but I want to find something. So he looked into his little purple or his little maroon and orange purse, and he pulled out a pen. He had a pen, and he said, I've had this ballpoint pen. Somebody gave it to me 15 years ago. It was kind of a nice pen, like one of those $15 pens. And he said, I want you to have this. I want you to have this. And it was like he was giving me the Holy Grail or something. The Dalai Lama giving me a pen. I was like, wow. And I put it in my and I put it in my briefcase, and I carried it around for a year. And I looked at it, and it gave me a warm feeling. And then I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's the auxiliary Roman Catholic bishop for Los Angeles, Bishop Robert Barron, really good friend of mine. And we were talking, and we were eating at a sandwich place, and he was writing on a napkin. Or he had pulled out a napkin. I said something, he wanted to write it down. He said, do you have a pen? And I said, I do. I do. And then I said to him, and this was, I'm kind of embarrassed about this because this was prideful and it was sort of self-centered. And I said, the Dalai Lama gave me that pen, right? And he said, oh, I've always loved the Dalai Lama. I admire him so much. I've always wanted to meet him. And he talked about how his work had affected him so very, very much. And at that moment, the Dalai Lama in his compassion came to me. And you know what he said to me? He wasn't there, and I'm not insane. But you know what I don't think. You know what he said to me? He said, you know what you need to do. And I gave Bishop Barron that pen. Because the gift of that pen was in the giving of that pen. And I had no idea. That had never occurred to me in the past. I mean, certainly I've learned that. I learned that in Sunday school or something when I was a kid. But the Dalai Lama taught me that, not with empathy. He taught me that with a deep act of compassion. And it changed my life a tiny little bit.